Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about probability fractions and percents. Content objective is students will be able to find the percent, the part, or the whole given a probability situation. The language objective is students will be able to discuss possible ways of breaking down percent problems to create a tape diagram. Why am I learning this? Well, it's important for real-world examples like finding the percent of homes in which television is being watched at a given time. So far in this unit, we've discussed converting between decimals, percents, and fractions, writing equivalent fractions, probability, and today we're going to go ahead and extend these ideas together. So let's take a look at the first one. It says, if 60% of marbles in a bag are purple, and there are 145 marbles in the bag, how many of the marbles are purple? So the probability of choosing purple is 60%, which you can go ahead and write as 60 out of 100. It's still 60%, which reduces to 6/10, or 3/5. So if you're wondering, from this fraction I divided by 10 to get 6/10, and then to this fraction I divided by 2 to get to 3/5. So it's just one reduced fraction after the other. All of these are still considered equivalent. They mean the same exact value. So, which I can also write this as a decimal. This you would read as 6/10, which looks like that. So the question is, how many purple marbles are in the bag? So, well, let's see. 60% of the 145 marbles are purple. We do know that. So we need to figure out what 60% of 145 is. So again, we can write 60% is 60 out of 100, 6/10, or 3/5. Okay, which means here that 3 out of every 5 marbles in the bag are purple. So last year, you did use tables to create equivalent ratios or fractions. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a table to see what this is equivalent to. Okay, starting with 3/5. If we had 10 marbles, we would have 6 purples because it's doubling. What if we tripled it to 15? Then we would triple the 3 and give us 9. So if you continue this until we finally get 145, because we want to know how much it is out of 145. We're looking for a total of 145. Let's see how many purple that leaves us with. So we're just going to keep going until we reach 145, getting closer and right here. So if you get out of 145, you're going to find that 87 of them will be purple. Okay. So if 60% of the 145 marbles in the bag are purple, then I would say 87 of them are purple. So this is one way, is creating that table to create equivalent ratios so we can see how that is affected. Okay, so now, last year you also used a tape diagram with percent problems, okay? So for this tape diagram, you can split them into 100 parts. You can split them into parts of 10, or you can split them into 5 parts. Why are these our options? Because they're nice numbers that we can, when we go into the mathematical way, these are nice numbers that we can easily convert back to 100. 5 times 20 is 100, 10 times 10 is 100, 100 times 1 is 100. So here, I went ahead and split them into 5 equal parts. And in order to split them into 5 equal parts, I had to do 145 divided by 5, which would give me 29. And that's how we got 29 for each of these in our tape diagram. So 5 equal parts, and each of them have to be 29. So remember, there's 145 total, and you would, if you added all these up, you would get 145. The question is, what's 60% of that? Okay, well, first of all, since they're in 5 equal parts, 5 times what gives you 100? 20, which means each of these represent 20%. Okay, so here's 20, here's 40, here's 60%. So of this, that's considered 3/5, and if you count all of these, you would count that there's a total of 87. So, once again, notice your answer is still 87, no matter which way you do it. Okay, so last year you also compared the part to the whole. So for example, you can look at the percent over 100, which is the part over the whole. So here you have 60 over 100 equals the part that we're looking for, and it's going to be out of the total of 145. Okay, but before we figure out how this transforms, I want to reduce this fraction because I can't figure out what 100 is being multiplied to give me 145. So I'm going to reduce this fraction to 3/5, so hopefully you remember that. Now why is this nice? Because then I can figure out here, 5 times what gives me 145? In order to figure out, I'm going to go ahead and divide 145 divided by 5. This goes in twice. With a remainder of 4, drop down that 5, goes in 9 times evenly. So here, 5 is being multiplied by 29, which means 3 is going to have to be multiplied by 29. You're allowed to do this because 29 over 29 is just 1. Multiplying the number by a 1 doesn't change it. So the part is going to be 29 times 3, which is going to give you a total of 87, just like before. So again, no matter which method you use, you should still end up with the same exact answer. So my conclusion is still the same. 87 of the marbles are purple in this case. So last year, you also multiplied fractions and decimals. So here, 60% of 145. You could simply turn this into a fraction as 60 hundredths and multiply. Or you can say, hey, 60 hundredths is reduced to 3/5. Why would I prefer that? Because you're working with smaller numbers, and smaller numbers is always ideal. Okay, or you can multiply it as a decimal, so 6/10 times 145. But either way, you still would end up with 87 purple marbles. If you multiply this out versus this, you should still get the same answer. So this is how you would get it by multiplying fractions and decimals. So let's look at number 2. A box contains 195 marbles. 78 of them are brown. What percent of the 195 marbles are brown? Okay, so that's the question. What percent of 195 is 78? Okay, so we do know that 10% of 195 is 19.5. So one way to think about this is to divide 195 into 10 equal parts. And again, 10, 5, and 20 are all nice numbers that we can divide into parts. Sorry, I also forgot 100 because they're easier for us to convert the numbers. So here, let's go ahead and split them into tens. Why? Because then we can see this is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. You can see how they make up the whole 100%. Okay? So here, they want us to know what percent is going to be 78. Well, of this, I need to figure out how many it would take to make up 78. It would take 4 of these. So if you took 19.5 times 4, you'd end up with 36 or 738, 78. So here, it would take 4 of these to make our 78. So here, if each of this was 10%, we would have a total of 40%. So I would say 40% of the marbles are brown. So some mathematical ways might be okay to compare the part with the whole. So here, you can say, if you're trying to figure out the percent, I know part of it's 78 and the whole is 195. So now I'm going to go ahead and calculate that here we can reduce by 38. You might not see it right away, but if you divide both of them by 38, you'd end up with 2/5 here. 5 times 20 gives you 100, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same with 2 and multiply by 20, and that's going to give me a percent of 40%. Or you can go ahead and set it up as, okay, what percent, so we're going to put a percent out of 100, of, so times 195 is equal 78. And then from here, you can go ahead and solve. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and change this into 100ths, which looks like this as a decimal. And then you're going to go ahead and multiply the coefficient with 195, leaving you with 1 and 95 hundredths x equals 78. Since this means 1 and 95 hundredths times x, I'm going to divide both by 1 and 95 hundredths. This cancels out, leaving me with just x equals 78 divided by 1 and 95 hundredths, which would lead you to 40%. So if you want to see it, again, your top number, which is your numerator, will always be divided by the bottom number, which is your denominator. Decimal belongs at the end. I'm going to have to move my decimal 2 places, so I'm going to do the same here. How many times does 195 go into 7? It can't. How about 78? It can't. How about 780? Well, I'm going to count this approximately 200. 200 is going to go into 780 about 4 times. So let's try that. 195 times 4, this is 20, carry the 2, 36 or 738. And then we're left with 780. So it went in nicely, 780 times. But then we have to bring down a 0. 195 goes in 0, 0 times. So it did leave you with 40%. So it's still the same exact answer. So again, 40% of the marbles are brown. Next question. A bag contains marbles and 45 of them are green. If 15% of the marbles are green, how many marbles are in the bag? So first, let's recognize that 15% of the total number of marbles are green. 15%, okay? 15% of what number is 45? Because we're told 45 of them are green. So what we could do is go ahead and say, okay, we're breaking it up into tens. Again, it's nice because you can see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. You can see how it makes up 100%. So here, if there's 10 equal parts, and we're trying to figure out how many marbles there are, what we're going to do is first say that each of these are 10%, and we want to get 15. So we want 10 and then half of this. Okay? Now here, we do know that this is 45. Understand here that this makes up 45. If you could think of it, if we split it into thirds, then this essentially means 15, 15, 15. That's what makes our 45. So if this is 15, this is 15, this whole box here is considered to be 30. So you can just say each box is 30. If each box is 30, you know, how much are there all together? You can just simply multiply. Okay, 30 times 10, because there's 10 of them, and you'd end up with 300. So altogether, there are 300 total marbles. Now, a mathematical way might be to say, okay, you're comparing the percent over 100 as a part over whole. So here we know 15%, so that would go up here. Okay, 45 is the part. We're trying to figure out the whole, so we would set it up like so. So here we can go ahead and jump straight into, okay, how does 15 become 45? Well, it's tripling. We're multiplying it by 3, which you can do the same thing here. So you would get a whole of 100 times 3, which is 300. Or you can reduce. Reducing definitely helps sometimes because you might not see it right away here. So for example, you can reduce it to 3/20, and then you would ask yourself, 3 times what gives you 45? Well, let's figure it out. 3 goes into 45 how many times? Once. This is 15. This goes in 5 times, so it's 15. So you'd be multiplying this by 15. So I'm going to have to do the same thing with 20. 20 times 15 is, guess what? 300, just the same. Or you can go ahead and decipher it. 15% of what number is 45? So 15%, 15 out of 100, of what? We don't know, so we called it an X. Is means equal, so is 45. I'm going to go ahead and multiply this. This is 1500, so we're going to put 1500's X equals 45. Then we're going to go ahead and say this means multiplication, so we're going to do the inverse, which is just divide both by 1500s. And you're going to be left with X equals 300 nonetheless. So it doesn't matter which way you do it, you're still going to end up with the same exact answer. That there are 300 marbles in the bag. Okay, so solve each of the following by any method. So you do what you feel most comfortable with. It says find 60% of 180. Go ahead and pause the video and try this one by yourself. Okay, so let's see how well we did. Here, one way is to do the tape diagram and saying, okay, if it's 180, so one method would be to use this tape diagram and say, okay, we can cut them into 5s. Okay, why? Because if we do cut them into 5s, it means each one is 20%. So here's 20%, here's 40%, here's 60%, here's 80%, and here's 100%. And since they're asking us for 60%, our focus is right here. So we're just going to add 36 a total of 3 times, which would leave us with 108. Now, if you want a different method, maybe comparing the percentage with the part in the whole, we would say 60, of course, goes as the percent, okay, of 180. Well, we would consider that as the whole. So then you would reduce this. 60 over 100, if you remember, is 3/5, and work from there. How is 5 becoming 180? Well, it's being multiplied by 36. So I have to multiply 3 by 36, which gives me 108. Now, why am I reducing? Why do I reduce 60 hundredths to 3/5? Because notice here, we don't know what 100 is being multiplied to give me 180. But we could figure out how 5 is being multiplied to give me 180. So reducing does definitely help there. Okay, and the other method would be to solve it using percent and fractions. So here, 60% is 60 out of 100. Of 180, we're going to multiply by 180. We're going to go ahead and change this to 3/5 because it reduces. And then 3/5 times 180 could also be written as 6/10 times 180, which is still, once again, 108. So it doesn't really matter which method you choose. You should still end up with the same exact answer. Okay, so for number 5, do the same. Go ahead and pause the video and try number 5 by yourself. Okay, so let's go ahead and go over the answer. So it says, what percent of 120 is 48? What you want to do first is either use this tape diagram. Okay, you can go ahead and cut them into either parts of 5, parts of 10, or parts of 100. Parts of 5 make it just a little bit nicer just because the numbers are smaller. Since there are 5 equal parts, each of them have to be worth 24. So here, if we want to figure out how do we get to 48, we're going to have to keep adding 24 until we get 48. You're going to notice we had to go ahead and take 2 of them. So since we took 2 of them, and they're cut into 5 parts, each is worth 20%. Here's 20, here's 40, here's 60, 80, 100. So what percent is 100? What percent of 120 is 48? I would say 40%. Okay. Now, another thing would be to, of course, compare the percentage with the part in the whole. So we don't know the percent yet, so we're going to leave that alone. We do know part is 48 and 120 is a whole. Okay, and then from here you want to reduce whenever possible, unless you can figure out how one number is being transformed into the other. I can't figure out how 100 is turning into 120, so I do want to reduce. I'm going to reduce by, let's say, 12, and that's going to leave me with, let's see, 4 over 10, because 48 divided by 12 is 4, and 120 divided by 12 is 10. Now, why is this nice? Because then I can say, okay, how is 10 becoming 100? Well, I'm multiplying by 10. So I need to multiply 4 by 10, which gives me 40%. So notice, so far, our answers don't change no matter which method we choose. Now, last method, we can go ahead and do fractions and decimals. What percent of 120 is 48? So I don't know the percent, so it's going to be some variable over 100, because that's how you write a percent. Of, so times 120 is, means equal, 48. I'm going to go ahead and multiply this together. We're going to go ahead and count this as a 1, which means this is 1/100 x times 120 equals 48. We're going to go ahead and multiply the coefficient with 120, which gives us 1 2/10 x. Now this means multiplication, so I'm going to do the inverse and divide both by 1 2/10, which leaves us with x equals 40%. Okay, because it would be 40, and then if you put it up here, 40 over 100 is 40%. Okay, so let's try number 6. Once again, pause the video and try number 6 by yourself. Okay, so now for number 6, let's go ahead and go over number 6 together. It says 25% of what number is 12? So we're trying to figure out what the total is. So right now, since they gave us 25%, I do want to go ahead and separate the tape diagram in terms of 4. Why? Because each one is worth a quarter, so it's easier that way. I do know that 1/4, so 25% of it is 12, so each one of these are 12. Okay, so if I label each of them to be 12, what is the whole considered? Well, it's 12 repeated 4 times, so 12 times 4 is going to give you 48. So that's one method. You can also compare the percentage over the part and the whole. Percent is 25, so I'm going to put 25 up here. The part is 12. I don't know the whole. So here, again, you definitely want to reduce. Why? Because like here, how is 12 becoming 25? I don't know. It's not a nice whole number. It could be figured, you could figure it out. However, it's going to be a little bit more time consuming. What would be easier is for me to reduce this to 1/4 because I'm dividing both by, because I can divide both by 25, and that's what would give you our 1/4. Now see, this is nice because then I can easily see how is 1 becoming 12. Well, I'm multiplying it by 12. So I'm going to multiply 4 by 12, which is going to give me a total of 48. And the other method, of course, would be to work it in terms of percents and fractions. Here, 25%, so 25 out of 100, times what number? So x equals 12. Well, first you're going to turn this into 25 hundredths x. You're going to divide both sides by 25 hundredths, and you're going to still be left with x equals 48. So no matter which way you do it, once again, you're going to end up with the same answer. You do what you feel most comfortable with. So that is going to conclude the lesson for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, as always, bye!